Chapter 13. Well, we had talked about it, and when she asked if there was anything else, our conversation just came back to me. It's one of those things that I think will help us get more out of this trip while we are here. Besides, if it's easier than expected, then it'll be useful when we need to ask people questions. Jay turned and unlocked the door, hoping that Lexie would not see the blush that had crept up the side of his face. And maybe it'll help you feel a connection to the people here and the country. Like you wanted. Lexie's hand reached for Jay's back before she stopped and pulled it back. The hand fell to her side, having grasped only empty air. Inside the room, they put their luggage carefully onto the floor before looking around. It was a decent-sized space for one person, and maybe a little small for two. The bed was large enough for them both, which had been the main concern. They didn't plan on spending that much time inside or at the B&B, in any case. Closing the door behind them, they flipped the lock and fell exhausted onto the bed, still fully clothed. Lexie groaned as the sudden movement jolted her side, before deciding she was too tired to take care of it at the moment. The sun had already been up when they had arrived in France, and while it had only been a few hours since they had arrived, it had been a mentally draining time. The brief nap that Lexie had managed on the train had done nothing to alleviate that. If anything, when a nap was too short, it tended to make things worse. Locally, the time was nearing 2 in the afternoon, instead of 8 in the morning. The time they had slept on the plane had done little to help them adjust, as they had hoped. Sleep claimed both within seconds of their faces hitting the bed. Pillows unused as their feet and lower legs dangled off the bed into space. The shadows had slid across the floor and begun to lengthen when a knock at their door roused them from their dreamless slumber. Exhaustion clearly dragging at their droopy eyes, they stumbled over to the door, unlocking and opening it right as their hostess began to knock a second time. She briefly took in their disheveled and obviously sleep-wrinkled features. Sophie hid her face behind her hand and laughed before talking. "I apologize. You both look so adorable, though. I thought you might be hungry after your long trip here. I noticed earlier that the tags from the airline were still attached to your luggage. So I thought that you had just come from the airport. It is not good to sleep all through the day when you have jet lag. Dinner will be ready shortly, so go get washed up before you come down and socialize for a while." She smiled softly at them and remained in place for a second longer, ensuring that they had understood what she said before nodding once and leaving them to prepare. Jay closed the door, leaning heavily against it as he slid to the floor. A sleepy yawn engulfed first him and then Lexie in turn. "Do you think she will have coffee down there?" Jay wondered, struggling to sound coherent. "No idea, but we obviously need to find out." Looking down at her wrinkled dress, Lexie sighed before bending over and grabbing her suitcase. Placing it on the bed, she opened the flap and pulled out a towel, along with a pair of slim jeans and a faded red t-shirt. "I'll go wash and change first, assuming no one else is using it, of course. Why don't you start to unpack and change in here, and then you can use it when I'm done," Lexie told him as she held her clothes. "Thanks, leave me only the cold water, will you?" Jay asked, laughing. "Would I do something like that?" Lexie asked, a mock-hurt look pasted across her face, eyes laughing along with him. "Of course you would. You're a female. Isn't that what you are all known for? I think I'll wait until tonight before washing fully, so use all the hot water you want." There was a pause before he added, looking sheepishly chagrined. "Unless I smell that bad, of course." Lexie turned to the door with a wave of her free hand. "You smell fine. Don't forget, we've already changed our clothes once today." That kept the airplane stink from really sinking in. With those parting words, she closed the door behind her and left. Rifling through his own suitcase, Jay pulled out his clothes and set them to the side in an orderly fashion, keeping everything organized for easy repacking and keeping the clothes that had already been worn separate. Keeping one eye on the closed door, he decided it would not be worth it to bother locking it before changing, and stripped as quickly as he could. Fresh pants on, he sat on the edge of the bed while he pulled on and laced his shoes. Standing, he grabbed his shirt and started to drop it over his head before pausing to sniff his armpit. With a shake of his head, he let go of the shirt, letting it hang around his neck, and grabbed the deodorant. Jay stepped into the hallway at the same time as Lexie, who apparently, while not having taken a long shower, had certainly taken a hot one. If her pink skin and the steam that was flowing out behind her were any indications. He took her in as she joined him and saw that what he had thought were a pair of jeans before were capris that hugged her hips and legs. "You are looking rather nice for a mere dinner," he told her, his eyes flicking to the damp hair framing her face. She smiled at his compliment before opening the door to their room and throwing her used clothes carelessly onto the floor. Taking the key from him, she locked the door behind them and grabbed his arm. "Why, thank you, you don't look so bad yourself. Although I think we both know that these are ordinary everyday clothes and nothing special." Squeezing his arm in gratitude, she pulled him along beside her as they walked down the stairs and into the waiting and already full dining room, noticing that each plate remained untouched and clean. Pulling out one of the two open chairs for Lexie to sit in, he waited for her to be seated before turning to the gathered people. "Sorry we're late. We didn't realize that you would be waiting for us to eat. It was a long flight and we needed a moment to freshen up." With a tilt of his head towards their hostess, Jay pulled out his chair and sat down beside Lexie. Everyone turned their head to the hostess as she stood to speak. "It is no problem. The last person walked in just before you did. I admit that I forgot to mention it anyway when you checked in that we eat our meals together while you are here." She sat back down before continuing. "I usually like to give our guests their choice in saying grace before the meal or skipping it. It seems that most here currently are of a religious persuasion of one form or another. If you will close your eyes and clasp your hands together, we can begin." With that finished, she nodded to the gathered guests and waited as each took the hand of the person beside them and bowed their head. There was silence for a moment before one of the guests started speaking in their own language. They spoke for a moment, praying, before stopping and saying something that was quickly followed by everyone else in what appeared to be their language's version of Amen. Silence followed as they made sure that everyone was done praying before they let go of their neighbor's hand. The room erupted into sound as people started talking to their partners. A multitude of languages sprang forth around the table so that it was impossible to place who was speaking what, unless you were right next to them. Jay and Lexie sat in stunned, wonder-filled silence before beginning to fill their plates with the food that engulfed the table. The table's occupants were much too loud for them to comfortably talk to the few other English speakers staying there. Instead, they sat and ate, while calmly watching the people around them and taking in their mannerisms. Some would shovel food into their gaping maws while talking, others would talk in between swallows, and others still sat back in their chairs, talking quietly to their companions as they brought their food to their mouths. The wide display of manners and people on display was a startling sight to behold firsthand. The food was quickly polished off, and everyone quieted as dessert was brought to the table. It was some kind of pie that had cherries and custard, and everyone dug into it with delight. As soon as everyone finished, they all stood from the table and left the room, leaving their various dishes on the table. Jay and Lexie stood alone as the room emptied around them until they were alone with Sophie. They looked at the table and then at her. "Would you like some help to clear the table?" Lexie asked, taking the lead. Smiling, Sophie replied, "No, this is the way we do things here. You eat and I clean." They looked skeptically at each other before looking at the table and back at Sophie. "If you are sure, I guess." The question was clearly visible on Jay's face as he spoke. "I am. This is the way we have always done things. Now why do not you go on outside and tour the grounds while there is still some light left? I will clear things up here while you are gone. If you are not too tired, we can talk more tonight before you retire." Sophie smiled at them as she spoke, assuring them that everything was all right and that they should do as she had said. It proved to be a perfect time for them to take a walk outside. The golden light of the sunset splashed everything with brilliant color, highlighting the beauty of the world around them. The temperature was just right, and there was no need for them to wear anything heavier to ward off a chill. Their leisurely stroll around the grounds revealed a well-taken-care-of property that was filled with beauty. The silence between them was comfortable as they walked, just enjoying the shared company and their surroundings. After a complete circuit of the property, Sophie exited the house and called to them from the porch. "I am finished cleaning if you would still like to talk," she informed them, watching as they came closer to the house. "That sounds fine. You have a beautiful property here," Jay replied as the fading sunlight surrounded them in one last brilliant beam of light before fading completely. Sophie was staring at Jay with an odd look on her face as they joined her on the porch. "Something has been bugging me since earlier when I first saw you, and I just realized what it was. There is something very familiar about you. Have you perhaps stayed with us in the past, or maybe have family here in France that I might have met?" she asked Jay while still looking at him with that odd look on her face. Jay was shaking his head before she had even finished speaking. "I'm sorry, but the last time either of us was in France was when we were babies. As for any family that may be here, I can't say for certain, but I do not believe that to be the case." He apologized, unwilling to go into their unusual history at this time. "If you remember who he reminds you of, though, we would appreciate it if you told us," Lexie interjected, taking her focus off Jay. She could feel that he didn't want to talk about any of this right now. There was no reason for them to tell her. She was nice enough. Once they left France, the likelihood of them ever seeing her again was incredibly slim. Telling her anything private, especially anything that obviously made Jay uncomfortable, was pointless. If she could remember who Jay reminded her of, then that would be another matter entirely. There were a lot of questions surrounding his early childhood here. It was a possibility that he did indeed have family here, and maybe she even knew them. In which case, them not telling her why they had come here could keep them from learning helpful information. Unfortunately, while it was possible, the decision had been made by Jay, and she would respect it for now. "If I remember anything, I will." She smiled and agreed to their simple request. Lexie noticed that while she always seemed to have a smile on her face, it rarely reached her eyes in true warmth. "Now please follow me inside, and we can talk over a cup of tea. You can tell me what you want to know and learn. I will do my best to accommodate and help." This time the smile reached her eyes as she spoke to them. They followed her into a sitting room, where she promptly left them to get the tea that had been promised to them. The room had cream-colored walls, light blue carpeting, and reddish-brown leather couches with a wooden coffee table between them. It was an exceedingly ugly room that in no way represented anything that they had expected of a French sitting room. They exchanged glances while they waited for Sophie to return, their raised brows saying all that was needed about their opinion of the room. Sophie returned to the room, holding a tray with a pot of tea in her hands to find them standing. Neither wanted to be the first to sit on those couches. Sophie looked at them and then at the couches before bursting into laughter. She barely made it to the coffee table in time to set the tray down before she created an accident. "Oh dear," she muttered breathlessly, trying to regain her composure. "I am sorry. I always forget how people react to this room the first time they see it, and these couches. Nothing in this room matches. It is hideous. Come sit down. I guarantee that you will be pleasantly surprised." Still somewhat hesitant, they sat down before fully relaxing and sinking into the depths of the couch with twin sighs of relaxation. "I understand, truly I do. These have to be the ugliest couches I have ever seen in my entire life. I would have had them removed if they were not so comfortable. It is like sitting on a cloud that hugs your body in just the right way." They had to agree with her. They might be ugly, but they were supremely comfortable to sit in. Sophie handed them cups filled with a watery amber-colored liquid before relaxing into her own couch. She remained silent as she watched them sip their tea, waiting to see their reaction to the delicious hot refreshment before talking. "This is good. What kind of tea is this?" They both asked in unison, leaning forward slightly. I cannot tell you that. It is my own personal blend. If you like it that much though, I can make enough of it for you to bring back with you. She offered them kindly. Absolutely, I think that we would both like that if you would be so kind, Lexie agreed, looking at Jay in expectation as she answered for them both. Yes, we would. We definitely would. What did you want to talk to us about though? He asked, bringing them back to why she had brought them here in the first place. I did not have anything specific in mind tonight for us to talk about. I would like to know what kind of experience you have with languages outside of your own, in this case specifically French. I don't think that either of us has had any exposure to foreign languages, outside of what you experience from watching television. In our schooling, it was a subject that was not offered. We will be starting from scratch. Sorry. Lexie informed her and then apologized for their ignorance. Unsure as to why she was apologizing or hedging her answer to Sophie. Do not apologize for something that was outside your control school-wise. She sniffed at them, slightly upturning her nose. If anything, you should be apologizing for never taking the time to pursue it on your own until now, especially if you knew you were going to be going abroad. This trip actually came up rather suddenly. Neither of us expected to be here 2 weeks ago. You are right though, we don't really have a suitable excuse or reason for us not taking the time to learn until now. Traveling abroad was something we desired, but never seemed likely in our lives, is the best that I can offer. Lexie told her, feeling the need to defend them both. Sophie looked at them over her poised teacup, thinking about what Lexie had just told her. It does not matter in any case. This actually may be better for you. Fewer mistakes and useless tricks and tips to trip you up along the way. She sighed and lowered the cup back onto its plate. It would seem it is my turn to apologize. I reacted rashly without knowing anything about your past or circumstances. You are making the effort now, and that is all that matters. Now let us change topics. Tell me, is there anything in particular you are hoping to visit while you are staying here? If the rather sudden change in the topic made them feel anything other than gratitude and relief, they hit it well. With the new topic established, everyone gathered, relaxed, and they found themselves talking about the list of places that they had shared with each other earlier. Their real reason for being there was never discussed, but the places that interested them were. Sophie knew them all, and had opinions, as well as additional items to see for each of them. She knew her country well, and was a fountain of information. They talked far longer than they had meant to, and before they knew it, huge head-swallowing yawns were dragging at them. Noticing how tired they were, Sophie looked at the clock on the wall and realized that they had been talking for hours. It was past time for them to sleep. They needed to recover from their jet lag, after all. She should not have kept them for as long as she had. She could not truly feel guilty over it though, for while they were young and somewhat naive, they were both interesting people. She had enjoyed talking with them far more than she thought she would. Truly interesting and intelligent people rarely made their way into her life, and they were both. Off to bed, the both of you. You need to get to sleep, or you will have no energy to do anything tomorrow. They dragged themselves off the couch that had been threatening to swallow them, and with a short goodnight to their hostess, stumbled up the stairs and down what felt like an impossibly long hallway, and into their room. Jay looked at the bed with blurry-eyed longing before grabbing a towel and his sleepwear, and making his way down to the bathroom to clean up before turning in. Lexie was asleep by the time he rejoined her in the room. Closing the door as quietly as he could behind him, he turned on a lamp near the bed and dropped his clothes with the rest that had been worn already. He could sort them properly in the morning. As it is, he was barely coherent enough to plug his phone into its charger before collapsing onto the bed and turning off the lamp. Sleep claimed him quickly and completely.